Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, I have made it through another week of this minefield of a calendar I set for myself. This time it was a 2-day trip to San Diego to give a 2-hour presentation, also known as the Gil Show, at a client sales meeting. Then a red-eye back to New Jersey, so I could land at 6 a.m. and head straight on to a trade show, which is more of a diffuse, more like Gil improv, I guess, than a strict Gil show. But that all went fine, although I bailed around 1:30 rather than stay for the whole shebang. Finishes at 4 o'clock. They do a reception after and all this stuff. I just didn't have the energy, did enough schmoozing, and well, I'd say I didn't have enough energy, but afterwards I, instead of going home, drove on to Princeton, about half an hour away, spent some money at Hilton's, one of my favorite menswear stores. Then I hit Labyrinth Books to pick up this week's guest's book and to catch up with one of the managers. Because I figure I should have some fun while I'm running myself into the ground, and menswear and books are pretty much where it's at. And I am. Make no mistake, running myself into the ground. I don't sound great right now, which I'm hoping is just the after effects of COVID and flu vaccines, which I did over the weekend, and not cold, flu, COVID, whatever. Anyway, discretion being the better part of valor, I decided not to turn around on Friday and head out to Ohio for Cartoon Crossroads Columbus for the weekend because I needed the rest and the vaccinations, and I figured no one was going to miss me. But this weekend, which is part of why I got shut up, I'm off to Italy for a business trip. There is a huge trade show in Milan next week, like the Super Bowl for the weird pharma sector that I work in. So we're going a few days early, spending a little while in Rome before taking a train up to Milan, at which point I go into heavy-duty work mode, and my wife goes off and has a good time in Milan and wonders why I'm staring at the wall for half an hour after I get back from the full day at the show. But anyway, all of which is to say, I will not be posting a new episode next week. I have the following week's show already recorded. I did that this summer for an upcoming book, and that's all ready to go. And should have the following week's one in the can after tomorrow. And the week after that, I also recorded already. So in theory, October's all going to be taken care of. But for now, there is too much to do, and I really don't want to carry my podcast gear on this trip with me because that bag is about 9 pounds on its own, and I'm going to have 2 suits, 3 shirts, dress shoes, toiletries, underwear, a little casual wear, etc. in the carry-on for 7 days. So really bringing the pod gear and doing an intro while I'm sitting in Rome or Milan, not going to happen. I promise I will do the weekly email, though. I will send all sorts of neat pictures from the trip, so you'll see that stuff. But that is just the boring aspects of my life, sort of the stuff that goes into helping me make this show, but you're not here for that. You're here for the conversation. So let's get to it. My guest this week is Christopher Brown, who has a fantastic new book out now from Timber Press, A Natural History of Empty Lots, Field Notes from Urban Edgelands, Back Alleys, and Other Wild Places. Chris has been on the show a few times already over the past couple of years, talking mainly around his great speculative fiction novels, Tropic of Kansas, Rule of Capture, and Failed State. This time, he is in nonfiction mode, diving into, well, the environmental themes that permeate his novels. Now, I'm going to try and talk about this book, and it's going to be a little tough or weird to get at. I want to tell you, I've had a run of really strong books by guests this year, like books that have really affected me. And sometimes I don't slow down enough to let that sink in and let them really kind of have their way with have their way with me. And I will say a natural history of empty lots means it's going to be even tougher for me to pick even my top 3 when I do the guest list episode this December. This is a fantastic book. It's an exploration of long time and deep roots and the impact of colonization on East Austin, on Texas, on America, on the earth. Chris uses nature writing as a way in to investigate more than just nature, to investigate our ways of life and our relationship to the world and to nature and to each other, and the ways in which urban sprawl can leave behind pockets of wildness that the way he approaches them and brings them to us, it's like other dimensions, and they're right in front of us. And the book has some of his photographs in it, largely prose, but you'll get a few examples of what he's seeing and what he's exploring. But it's so much better to just dive into the text of it all. And in the process, Chris also examines his own life, how he came to live in Austin, how he wound up building this gorgeous statement of a house on the site of a former petroleum pipeline. And we've talked about this before on the show. There's a mini documentary, an episode of a documentary series on Apple TV about it. It's a place that I'm dying to see. I hope to get down to Texas sometime to see him. But I'll say beyond that, the book throughout it's just suffused with his observations of the natural world and those deep roots I mentioned. And the narrative shifts in time that he engages in. Sometimes he bypasses the personal for the ecological or the communal or the historical and the theoretical when he starts talking about the situationists and psychogeography, something that's completely divorced from Texas, but of course plays into every aspect of every city and every gathering of man. Now, like me, Chris has a non-arts life, at least adjacent to his arts life. For me, this is, Chris has a non-arts life. We'll just put it that way. And the book brings in his history as a lawyer, and the work that he's done and the work that he still does, and how it helps the community as they're trying to push back on the forces that are just striving for development and growth without end. And that life, the realities of working in business and working as a lawyer, gives him enough perspective to know, what things you can and can't fight over and why you still need to fight. But the realization that certain things are going to happen, you just have to try to mitigate, as best you can. And I'll say beyond all this, I don't want to get just at as though it's filled with important things you must know, but the prose it's like a companion on a walk in the woods. It points things out to you. It shows you the world around you, and it's a little wry and it's never long-winded. And it's a guide on a visit to this whole world you never knew was right beside you. It's beautifully written, beautifully constructed, brings together so many threads of Chris's writing and his fiction as well as his newsletter. And regular readers of my newsletter know that I often link out to Chris's weekly Field Notes newsletter. The posts there are sort of a soil for this book. And I go on a little bit too much at the beginning of this about differentiating the book from the newsletter, but Empty Lots really stands on its own. I loved this book. In a way, and maybe I'm just too influenced by some of my past guests and other transformational experiences I've had in the past few months, this sort of works for me, this book, like those Joe Coleman paintings I talked about in episode 600. All these different zones that evoke different aspects of life and the whole world and the personal within it, and it never loses sight of the whole totality. Chris would be happy if I said his writing reminded me of a Joe Coleman painting, so I'll leave it at that. A Natural History of Empty Lots is an absolute wonder of a book for all the reasons I've mentioned and more. I hope you'll go get it and that you'll sign up for Chris's Field Notes newsletter, which is at fieldnotes, all one word, .ChristopherBrown, all one word, .com. I'll put a link to that in the show and episode notes here. Now, we did this one remotely, so audio's a little, there's ups and downs, and Chris had a squeaky chair. I swear to God, it wasn't my chair. It was his chair. And those are the only caveats. Here's Chris's bio. Christopher Brown is the Philip K. Dick World Fantasy and John W. Campbell Award-nominated author of the novels Tropic of Kansas, Rule of Capture, and Failed State. Also an accomplished lawyer, he has worked on 2 Supreme Court confirmation hearings, led the technology corporate practice of a major American law firm, and been the general counsel of 2 public companies. And now, the 2024 Virtual Memories Conversation with Christopher Brown. We talked last year at ReaderCon when this book was pretty late in process. Did it mutate from there? Did you know what you had at that point?
Yeah, I mean, it changed a lot, I think. I did, I think if we talked in July,
yeah,
that would have been when I was, I don't know, just kind of waiting on the first round of editorial comments from my editor. And so I had turned it in and had an idea of what I was doing, but I was still kind of figuring out how to weave all the different parts together of what's sort of, from a narrative standpoint, trying to blend a lot of different things. And so it morphed quite a bit from the first draft, which, adhered pretty closely to the proposal that I had written and had a kind of a little more, was maybe a little bit more conventional in structure, a little bit more kind of episodic or vignette based. And so the kind of overarching narrative through line really evolved quite a bit.
I'll say that's one of the things I found fascinating. It doesn't feel like a greatest hits collection. I know this is derived from the Field Notes newsletter, but it feels like more than that, especially in terms of that narrative sense you bring in and the memoiristic vibe, which is never heavy-handed, but shows us who the author is. Was that part of the next draft, or how things changed from there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I never wanted to write. It's not a. It's.
Not the greatest hits part, but yeah.
No, I mean, when you say derived from Field Notes, I mean, it's sort of based on the same material as Field Notes, sort of derived from the same sources, I would say. But I didn't want to do a compilation of newsletter posts. As much as I love like the old, like when people could just like take their blog and publish the greatest hits from their blog as a book. That was a fun era. But that's not what I was interested in doing. I'm kind of like, well, it's all already there. I need to do something new. And so I gave a lot of thought to, as I was working on it, to kind of like, I needed it. I mean, one of the things that my editor, who's also who's a novelist herself named McKenna Goodman, who kind of inherited this book when the person who acquired it left to undertake another job. She was sort of pressing me a little bit on the memoir aspect, and which doesn't come easily to me. I'm sort of like, nobody wants to hear about my so-called problems.
I believe you also phrase it as a pronounced deficiency at making authentic, vulnerable connection with my fellow humans. But however you want to phrase it. Raised by, I'll just blame my parents like that. So, so I was thinking a lot about what kind of story it was going to be, because it wanted to combine that nature writing, generic style that I had been riffing on in Field Notes, right? And the beauty of nature writing and the kind of potential for sort of lyrical
lyrical, descriptive, translation of the richness of the world into language, and to do some of the things that like kind of classic American, especially nonfiction, does, of being like an effective information delivery vehicle, of like giving you actionable information, you can use, right? Not like business book level, but, doing that thing that I think a lot of people want their nonfiction reading to do, imparting information. And then telling a story in a way that a novel tells a story, in a way that a good memoir tells a story. And it had to be a first person kind of a story. And so but there's no source for that book that I could. And so I was like, that's just mixing all these different things. And then I thought about it, and I realized there is a kind of a model for that kind of a book that was really very much the one I had already been thinking about without consciously knowing that was what I was thinking about, if that makes sense. And that's the sort of narratives of like exploration and colonization and settlement and discovery that we all kind of grow up reading in this country, at least. They're, told around the dinner table, the sort of the stories of the family of, where we came from and why we left there and how we got here and what the trip was like and what we found here and how we changed it and how it changed us and all of that. And just, stories of exploration. Like I went to this weird place and this is what I found. And so playing with those kinds of stories, but trying to then like do something different with them to kind of invert them in a science fictional kind of way, in a sort of almost Ballardian way, to like turn narratives of colonization into to produce a narrative of decolonization, if you will, of the world around us, of our lives, of the self, maybe of the community and the future. I don't know. So some of those things, the narrower the aperture, the more, plausible the ambition, but that was the goal.
Yeah. It felt like that's, well, knowing the novels, having read field notes for so long, finding a different voice in this book, I found kind of thrilling. I go into any one of these books assuming the Peregrine is going to be the template things are based on. And very early on, it was okay. There are, little Peregrine-esque vibes, J.A. Baker-ish moments, but yeah, you bringing the personal into it, bringing the way the midlife crisis opens up into bigger questions again of America and capitalism and decolonization or post-colonial existence, however you're going to define it or describe it. The book takes a lot of interesting turns and a pretty amazing journey to go on.
Well, I'm glad you think so. Thank you.
And again, that's one of those, like, I went in thinking, am I going to recognize themes and, individual anecdotes or things like that? And it really just, like you said, threads things together so beautifully. It doesn't feel in any way that it's a, like you said, the compilation vibe. It's much more its own creature. But to what extent was that a real challenge? When your modes before now are fiction, whether short or long, and science fiction particularly, and field notes, which again has a different mode. Was it tough for you beyond the Midwestern reticence about human vulnerability and such? Just finding that voice and being able to have faith in what you were building.
Yeah, it was hard. I mean, it was just it was challenging. It was like had to really
more challenging than building the house, or less challenging? That's sorry. Yeah.
I would say more challenging, or certainly challenging in very different ways. It's not like a project management challenge, Yeah. It's like
key milestones to pass,
emotional challenge of like, I like that. I often share with people the like aphorism that Bruce Sterling dropped on me in a writer's workshop, early in my career as a science fiction writer, which was, we're kind of in this, Saturday workshop we would do at his house called Turkey City. And I remember I brought some story, and he would give this kind of like, yeah, this is pretty good, but but I feel like you're not really biting into the copper wire here, like how do you like? I love that. I've always loved, and I was like, yeah, okay, exactly. That's like the perfect provocation to the writer. Are you really biting into the copper wire? Which sort of, when you're pushing somebody on, like, tell me the real story about your life, Mr. I hide behind my characters, right? Yeah. That's a good provocation, because it is, the very provocation itself is a kind of like tough guy writerly dodge. Yeah. Right? And so kind of, wrestling with that. How do you dig into the material? How do you tell the story while being true to your own principles about, like, I have it pretty easy. I don't need to be, complaining about my problems. Or how do you write a memoir that's about, the effort to transcend the self? Right? There's just a lot of things being wrestled with there. And so I think that task, I think that challenge produced some things that I was happy with in terms of, breaking into kind of new territory. And I think that model I had in mind as a kind of lodestar to guide me that I was talking about a minute ago was very helpful.
I will say it's a spoiler alert because it's an episode that's going to air a month from now, but I recorded with Simon Critchley about his new book on Christian mysticism. And he's got a line in there about how memoir is a pretty dead genre unless it includes a conversion or transcendence of some kind. So I think you're going to be okay. And I might send him a copy of this book because, again, when we go back to the Peregrine, he and I geeked out over that. But we've got a couple of other areas of common literary interest. But that was one of his little asides in the book. And I thought, no, I get where he's coming from completely. And the via negativa he brings in, the need for that sort of self-annihilation that I think this book captures, your book captures in the voice is always there, but you do disappear into what long time is, I feel. But that's that's the idea, totally. And that's a great point about that you and Simon Critchley make about how memoir is more interesting or more vital, perhaps, when it's a story of there's a kind of transformation, or sort of, would you say, like a religious transformation, or like a kind of, it doesn't have to be religion. I mean, we get into that. Yeah. He does not consider himself converted, even though this book is largely about the transcendent experiences of medieval Christian mystics and how that applies to today's life. It's going to be a great episode. You're going to love that one, but you got to wait a month. So
that sounds good. I mean, I was listening while I was working on this book. I was listening to this LRB podcast with Irina Dumitrescu and I think it's Mary Wellesley. Is that her name? And they're these medievalists, and they were talking about, they had this series about like female mystics. They did medieval female mystics.
That's exactly who he's focusing on in this. Oh, you're going to love that book. It's just called Mysticism from NYRB.
Yeah, and like talking about, the anchorite lady or anchoress or whatever, and stuff like that. And and like I talk in the book about Saint Onofrius and these kinds of stories of hermits and there's like that, and I talk about the Irish monks that the Vikings found in the caves of Iceland when they got there, and so that there's definitely that kind of thing is lurking in a way that is I don't know how kind of latently it's how completely expressed it is, but it's definitely there subtextually running through the work.
What did you learn about yourself in the process of this?
In the writing of the book?
Yeah.
I I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. We'll see if you can draw me out on it.
Everybody
I would
says I don't
say,
know, but go on.
you say what?
Everybody says I don't know, but they know something or they found something, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I found a way into telling, into applying. I found out how to tell, to kind of adhere to my idea of fidelity to truth telling in the literary sense,
Mm-hmm.
and first person story, and I think a way to try to, and I think I kind of cracked the code of how to like, I maybe somewhat crack the code of how to have that, to, engage in a form of self-expression that, is actively working in the process of that self-expression to kind of escape from, if not obliterate the self. I don't know. There's like a paradox there that,
which is also part of Simon's book. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, interesting. So, and then I don't know, and then you just you sort of reckon with identity, but a lot of ways the story the book tells is about kind of coming to terms with myself over the course of my life, and so the kind of the chronicling of that, the narrative chronicling of that. You don't learn so much as kind of synthesize it and distill it into sort of a truer accounting and with yourself, and so that I think, I mean, I definitely think, and so in the kind of the slow and stubborn evolution beyond the view from nowhere you get as a kind of like somewhat naive and gullible, middle class white guy from Des Moines, to come to see your unique and privileged view on a rich and diverse world. The discovery of a sense of community and of chasms to be crossed or to be bridged, across the human community and with the kind of other life around us. And lastly, I'll also say, this discovery that I think I really really reckoned with as I was writing the book, this kind of revelation that the idea of solitude in nature, which runs through all these kinds of texts you're talking about, which seem on one level to be like the escape from human community, right? And the escape from the noise of human society, and especially urbanized society, really, in its various forms. Escape from human civilization, if you will. That solitude in nature is really a myth, because what you find when you get into nature is not solitude. It's like a much deeper connection with all this other life around you, but it's a connection that precedes language and the alienation that's embodied in language. And so that was a revelation I had while writing the book, and it's been one that has stuck with me and I've been thinking about a lot.
Yeah. How did you, and this will again feed back into working on the book, and I know you took breaks from field notes in the midst of this, but sort of keeping those selves separate. I know they're both, Chris Brown ways of nature writing, but, doing the occasional newsletter while you were deep inside the book, finding ways to, let me just keep this in this mode while I, quote unquote, save the good stuff, or, a different, revelation or realization for the book. Was it a challenge, and where does field notes go from here, I guess, is the side question.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, and very much like, oh, wait, I need to not,
The spoilers. Yeah.
Yeah, no spoilers, right? Don't waste your good stuff. I mean, yeah, field notes in one sense is kind of like it's like an exercise in writing about nothing. Almost sometimes, because it's just like sometimes it just has to be like extracted from the kind of ambient landscape of a busy, normal urban week, right? And it doesn't have a lot of kind of pedagogical structure to it. It's not like it doesn't, I don't have it like kind of mapped out in advance, like this is the stuff I'm going to cover here or whatever. It's not at all about like actionable information. It's just sort of like a letter to friends, as it were. Yeah. And so, yeah, I do. I want to figure out now. I want to step back and kind of look at the newsletter and think about fresh things to do with it and fresh places to take it and maybe some things to do with structure there. I did play a lot with film photography and like trying to get more into like a different way of like bringing the analog into the digital and thinking about the form that way. And then the book got me to do a paper version of the newsletter.
Oh, yeah, I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
Which was really fun to do. And even if I kind of missed the window to do, I wanted to do it sort of offset or letterpress, go to like a letters press printer, at least for the cover. And, but I kind of ran out of time to do that. But now I really want to start doing like a quarterly print newsletter, because I think that's really fun. Yeah. And that format is intrinsically different because of the temporal issues you run into.
Right. Just making a couple of issues of a zine, I know I'm about 30 years too late on that, but, just doing a couple of those and trying to plot out the third one and figure out, what to do that's not going to be either repeating stuff from the first two or, the same stuff that goes into my ridiculous newsletters. It means something, though. That's separate.
You're talking about haiku for business travelers?
Yes. The third issue is coming along.
That.
There is actually there's a tone poem comic or a lyrical comic in there, provided I'm ever able to draw it, that you will groove on in the span of maybe 25 words over 3 pages. That has some themes I think you'll dig. I just have to learn to draw better.
I mean, yeah, the idea of like a kind of psychogeography of business travel, of like the anonymity of business travel, of kind of like,
Oh, trust me, there's a whole piece about Frank Stella plumbing outside of a condo building that I saw while taking the Pacific Surfliner Amtrak down to the Bio conference in San Diego. So yeah, there's stuff to be seen if you keep your eyes open. So, which is
totally,
again, the theme throughout the book for me is that sense of seeing. You're I know it's a newsletter also, but in the book there's all these moments of the hidden oak tree that was in plain sight. All these things that are, especially for where you're living in Austin, that are historical, that are long time and are not. They're camouflaged by the world around us. I don't know if you've done, more of those ranger classes, or if you came up to the Pine Barrens to study with that guy, gets mentioned. If you do, let me know. I'll join you next time. But yeah, that sense of learning to see inside the world you're already, that you become blind to, I guess. So.
Yeah, very much so. It's very much a book about learning to see. It does so mainly in this central Texan landscape in and around Austin, where I've spent most of my adult life. It does go elsewhere, but and here we have the good fortune of living in a place where agriculture only really arrived, like couple hundred years ago, right? 200 years ago. So 1820 or something. And so the erasure of what was here before us is a lot more recent than certainly, and you'd find in Europe or probably in, highly developed parts of Asia, and even then, say in New Jersey or New England or New York. And so, by the same token, or on the other hand, I should say, we also have, in Texas, a really unique kind of culture around the relationship with the land, as I've come to learn in my, close to 3 decades here. One with, a very extreme emphasis on private property, very few, the kind of the idea of there being parklands was a very recent thing here on a relative basis. And a very like hyper libertarian idea of that the land is there for human beings to take from and to take what they need from, and that leads to a pretty brutalist, industrial approach, as evidenced by the kind of the petrochemical infrastructure that kind of covers the landscape of the whole state in a way. And so going into those places and learning to see how those kinds of spaces simultaneously evidence the worst of our industrial abuses of the world around us, and at the same time provide zones of exclusion of other human activity that allow wild nature to kind of sneak back in or to find refuge, and sort of wrestling with that paradox. That's a kind of key part of the book. And then once you kind of start to see that, it starts to let you see other ways in which, nature expresses its presence in the city, in our most densely developed landscapes, like with great trees that happen to be survived, while some metropolis has grown up around them. And then learning to see like the stories, the like day-to-day, ephemeral stories that the land hides around the movement of wildlife and of various sorts, and kind of what's just happened there in the 10 seconds before you showed up, and all the animals scattered before you could see them. All those kinds of things that are sort of tracker stories that, yes, Tom Brown Jr., who, may he rest in peace, just passed away recently. He was as I call him, the Castaneda of the Pine Barrens, who told the story in his book, The Tracker, about growing up with a buddy who had a grandfather who was an Apache elder who taught them all of his tracking knowledge, and they learned to apply it in the landscape of kind of more rural parts of New Jersey. And then I guess he used it to help solve a crime. And that's how he originally became famous. And then, wrote this series of books and started his tracker school, where I think his kids are now running it. Gotcha. So after he passed away. Yeah.
It's, again, that weird New Jersey vibe that we have, where things are, the farther you get from New York City, things get stranger and stranger. And I'm only 25 miles away, but it's, there's some strange landscape and strange wildlife as far as these things go. I was thinking when you brought up I would say the encroachment or the interweaving of wildlife or wildness with the city. In its most exaggerated example, and it's something that comes up in the book, we've got the way during lockdown, animals started to figure out pretty quickly, hey, we can go into the city now, and started showing up. You see wild boars showing up in Japanese cities and other examples, so that sort of stuff. It puts me in mind that because Field Notes began in February 2020, just as we were heading into that world, would you have been able to write this book without COVID, without the pandemic, without the lessons that came out of those couple of years?
Yeah, definitely. I was writing this book in my head in a way before,
Did that crystallize
I've
things,
been kind
though?
of living this book.
Yeah.
I think it crystallized. I think it just made people more interested in this material.
Okay.
But I already had the interest. I think that to me, the most dramatic lesson of COVID was not so much how much nature was already out there, hiding in plain sight, and then able to come out, the kind of nature is healing stuff. I kind of knew that was there already.
Sure.
But what really it opened up to me was the possibility of change.
Yeah.
It was so. When it's just suddenly like, oh,
offices don't exist anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. Just like immediate, sudden change in how we live, and we're all like working at home around our families, and this kind of rediscovery of the hearth, even if it was electronic and digital in many respects, right? And and so the idea that global capitalism could be like completely turned off for a week or 3 weeks or however long it was, just in the immediate lockdown, right? And suddenly, like, the air got clean. You could feel it. It was just crazy, right? Just like instantaneous. And all of these things that, we had long been taught could never be shut down or the world would break. It's like they all got shut down and everything was fine. And so to me, as a object lesson in the potential of radical and rapid changes in the way we live, it was really profound. And in showing how making those kinds of changes could enrich our own lives by reconnecting us with each other and the real world in which we live, as opposed to the sort of manufactured one of the production of surplus, where we're forced to spend most of our time, and I guess the production and consumption of surplus, and better share the space we occupy with the other species of planetary life.
How's the response been to your work? This book's only been out for about a week or so. Field Notes has been going on for 4+ years. This is a weird one. Do non-U.S. readers respond differently to what you're writing about?
I think it's a question of discovery, right? Of just like, and so the response is a function of people knowing it's even there. I have found, I think that generally the response to this material, both the newsletter and very much with the book, the response tends to be like just reflexively enthusiastic at the sort of high level kind of teaser invitation the book and its preface makes. Mm-hmm. The sort of invitation to go explore what life is lurking in the empty lot or whatever. That sort of basic thing that's embedded in the title and in the cover and in the, sort of jacket copy, as you will. People really, it seems to really resonate with people. And like everybody from drive time, conservative talk radio jocks to, sort of esoteric literary types. And I always worry that it's going to not resonate as well with like serious natural scientists.
Yeah.
Because I'm not one, and I'm presuming to kind of,
eke into their territory,
wade into their territory, right? Which is one, that's sort of a zone of professional exclusion of a sort, be like them writing about law, right? Or science fiction. And so, but I haven't had much of that. I always wonder if I see like, I have to check my subscribers after one post and I'll have like a few drop off. I always think there's something going on. That or like politics. I've seen a few, like there've been a few online reviews that are like,
this Marxist writer, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a little, you get a little of this like, oh, this guy's going off about, the white colonists, give me a break, F off, whatever. So there's a little of that. In other countries, I've gotten a really great response from Mexican writers and readers. I've had a number of people reach out and they're like, oh, this like totally resonates with like the Mexican experience, which is really exciting to me. Even like Cristina Rivera Garza was posting about the book on X, Twitter, whatever we're allowed to call it, yesterday, which I was very excited about. And we have kind of like some mutual friends among writers in Mexico. I don't know how she heard about the book though, but that was nice. And then I don't know, in English readers definitely have an interest. I mean, this is very much in conversation with this rich body of English, British, I should say, literature about, landscape and urban landscape and edgelands, which is a very specifically English or British term. And so that response has been very positive, I think. And it's interesting. I've had a number of I've seen some online reviews where people are like, oh, I just assumed this was British nature writing. And then it's like, wait, I'm in Texas. It's just sort of from the promise of the book. That's what they assume. And then, and I don't know about, I have a number of German and kind of Northern European readers, a few, Australian readers, but I don't know. We'll have to see what readership the book finds beyond the kind of core English language readership.
Doing the audio version yourself?
Yeah, that was an interesting experience.
Yeah. I mean, I've gotten really good at working off scripts, that I write. But, what was it like for you?
It was like a lot easier than I expected, to be honest. When we were kind of working on the book, from an editorial standpoint last year, I was sort of like, hey, has anybody thought, or is there going to be an audio version? And it was like, oh, yeah, good question. Yeah, it could be. Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Let's do an audio version. I was like, yeah, because it would be artistically interesting to me if it were a possibility. And if the team thought it, made sense to narrate it, because it's a very, it's an intensely personal work. And because I thought the voice of the book is so like personal and so kind of structurally, it has some elaborate elements in some senses. It's kind of it's a sort of complex in some ways. And so I thought that kind of at the sentence level, sort of having an idea of how it ought to read would probably be helpful. And so they make you do a little tryout. Yeah. So I was like, yeah, only if you think it will be good, because they're like, yeah, it's kind of like, if you've been to a lot of live readings by authors, that, some authors are better or more natural at reading their work aloud than others. And I don't know where I fall on that spectrum, but with this one, it was really fun. And so I went to this little studio that mostly does like ADR, after dubbing of film and TV productions, at the edge of downtown Austin. And, it was 4 days in the studio, I guess. And, you basically read out loud until your cheeks get sore and or get fatigued. And then your tongue starts to get kind of like floppy in your mouth, and then it's the time to stop. Right. Yeah. So, I found myself over enunciating just a little bit to try to be clear.
No drawl.
I did community theater when I was in middle school. I was a lost boy in Peter Pan or something. And I was in some other similar kind of character in a Pippi Longstocking production. So some of that, that kind of practice your hard consonant stuff came through. But I remember the director who was on Zoom, was like a professional audiobook reader herself. She was like, "Where do your O's come from?" I was like, I don't know. It's a long story. So.
That's good.
Yeah, it was kind of Iowa through growing up in the 70s watching movies about California. I don't know.
Did you pronounce riparian correctly every time? Because your book has that more than I think it breaks the record for most uses of that word. But
the most, riparian. You say
I
it's
heard riparian because I actually had to look it up. I had to have Google pronounce it for me because I was convinced I was going to do it wrong. So it's got riparian.
Oh, I probably did it wrong. I think I said riparian. Okay. And only during the production I learned one should say Appalachia, not Appalachia.
That I've heard recently, and it always sounds pretentious in the opposite way. But yeah, so.
Yeah. The word that I noted in my print version of the newsletter was the most common one that I was worried when I was like reading that. I was like, oh, I'm going to find out all these repetitive uses that I, had worked hard to avoid. Right. And it wasn't as bad as I feared, but a word I used a lot was like variations on the word gnarl, gnarled, gnarly, yeah. And which is good because that's like a really cool, like weird Anglo-Saxon word that's tied to trees. So that's okay.
I'm good.
And it's just a good one, and it's a good like 70s, 80s kid word,
Yeah. Especially once we got into using it with skateboarders and surfers and such. So things being gnarly.
Absolutely.
So you've got a line in the book about your I'll quote here, skepticism of redemptive restorationist strategies and ecological puritanism. Can you expand, a bit on, the roots of that and how you kind of have to overcome that in the process of, as you show in the book, that sort of community building where you're working with other parties to try to get a good result, but, maybe you have to work with people who aren't exactly coming from the same degree of ideology or the same set of priors as you.
Yeah.
If that question makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, my skepticism of redemptive thinking it sort of originates in my experience as a writer and really as a writer of genre fiction. And I really learned it like doing a workshop. There's the writers John Kessel and Richard Butner they host a workshop every summer called Sycamore Hill. It's with working science fiction, fantasy, and horror writers. And so I've done that, I don't know, 6 times or so. And it's just a week long in the mountains, writerly retreat, doing deep critique of other people's work and of your own. And I learned a lot from the horror writers there about the power, the truth-telling power that non-redemptive storytelling has. And that's really what I was like, oh, that's what horror is. Horror is like, at its core, it's non-redemptive storytelling. That's what's scary is it's sort of, there's not, some like hopeful reassurance to kind of let you take away when you put the story down. And when you read good horror, it's like, it's like telling maybe through a dark mirror truths about how the world works. And so, and so that really stuck with me as in other aspects of my life, and it's how I started to see things, and it really impacted my own novels and how I thought about them, and just like to be very suspicious of our tendency, especially in American culture, I think, to like put that kind of redemptive spin on everything. That sort of, and it's all over our politics. It's like really framed right now in our politics in this kind of binary choice where people on one side are trying to revive the idea of the hopeful tomorrow. And I have some of that. I mean, I'm all about that project, but uh, the kind of hopeful tomorrow that's about bringing back the past, right? That's the one you got to really be wary of versus like a tomorrow that's different than anything we've seen before, right? And so I think you got to look at the natural world the same way. And so much of our thinking about our relationship with nature and how to make it more healthy is about the idea of restoration, which is a really intrinsically kind of conservative idea. It's like bringing back what was here before, and I mean, like bring back the king.
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of the core idea, the origin of the term, right? And I love reading about 17th century England and that part of it. It's like, was that a good thing? I don't know. And so, yeah, when you get into and I've seen the power of restoration firsthand. Like my own parents did it. They took a kind of blighted acreage in southern Iowa and they just burned it every year. My dad burned his eyebrows off the first time they did it, and doing these so-called controlled burns. Now that's become kind of professionalized, and there's like, firefighters do it as their kind of moonlighting side gig for extra money.
We know they're all arsonists anyway, so yeah.
Right. Just like all just like the way the cops and the criminals all have the same personality profiles, if you can believe the shrinks. And so I'd seen like they burn for and after they burn it every year, that they're like oak savanna, and within just a few years, the biodiversity recovery was astonishing and palpable. It was just evident to anybody. And so I certainly believe in that part of restoration, of like recovering biodiversity. I just think we should interrogate whether the biodiversity of 500 years ago is exactly what we should expect to see in 500 years from now.
This is something we've brought up or we've discussed in past ones. Being a father of a young kid and trying to keep some sense of, we'll say, non-pessimism, much less hope about what the future could be for her. Did you find it more challenging now than you did a year ago or less?
Oh, I don't find it that hard. I don't know.
Yeah?
I try to be clear-eyed about it, and I try to equip my children with the tools to navigate life. I try to live in the moment and enjoy today and not worry too much about next year. And I think that sense of like, preoccupation with planning for the future is a lot of then like the kind of like our culture of, it's tied up with the things I try to wrestle with in the book, with the preoccupation with accumulating surplus to survive the season, and all of the unhealthy things that produces, even as it is the core, kind of killer app of our civilization. And so I don't know. I think, and I see a lot of signs of people kind of waking up and, sensing what needs to be done in terms of, rewilding the future, the kind of immediate future, and I can see it in how people respond to the newsletter and to this book, and I can just see it, and just like as the book is now like bringing more attention to the stuff I've been doing in this area, and I'm seeing these people, just like who kind of show up on my feed, there's like people, new subscribers to the newsletter, or people talking about the book or whatever. There's just all these people out there doing amazing work in these areas. There's things like I didn't even clue into this, when I was working on the book, but this sort of happened after. But like in February of this year, the United Kingdom passed new legislation requiring that any new real estate development has to result in a 10% biodiversity net gain. There's like very real things going on to try to combat the biodiversity crisis. So really, the statistics are really horrifying. It's like you look at, this, I quote the World Wildlife Fund's Living Planet report from 2022, which estimates that, or estimated that, the wildlife population of the planet has plummeted by 69% since 1970, when I was a little kid. You just like hear a number like that, and it's like, oh, we're screwed. And you hear it, and it resonates with the truth of your own experience if you're paying attention. Even just the things like, why did I just go on a 3-hour, interstate road trip and there are no bugs splattered on my car? Weird little sort of things, the sad things that pass for our everyday experience of nature like that. When you see that, and then you see at the same time that there is a sense of urgency out there among a lot of people to do things about it. It gives you some sense of reassurance that, especially with the generation coming up, there's going to be an effort to achieve real change. By the same token, Gil, it's like, it's, the thing I also wrestle with in the book about the idea that you can't really deal with these problems in a meaningful way without reckoning with the sort of design flaws of the agricultural revolution. It makes me think that whatever we come up with is going to be sort of compromised, and that the truer, deeper solutions are going to take a lot longer. But I feel like people are coming around and we're getting on that path. And partly because, to your earlier question, COVID, I think, awakened in people a realization that, we don't have to live exactly this way. We can make a change. And we all have the tools to do it, even if it's like, I'm going to work from home today,
And we get these,
I'm going to take a 3-hour walk instead of a 20-minute lunch break, and that's sort of happening unofficially across the board. And those are good signs.
It's funny to me, like we talked about the instant disruption, given that, like when the financial crash happens in 2008, 2009, the Occupy people are seen as dilettantes, as privileged white people, et cetera. And it's they saw a level of dissatisfaction and had a lot of anger about where things were going. And we've seen multiple shocks and disruptions to the system since. And, as you put it, a lot of this stuff is a conflict between the forces of control. I'm still on a Pynchon kick from last year when I reread the entire body of work. But the forces of control and this counterforce of, I'll say nature, and human nature in some respects, the ways of just indolence and sloth being, something that could actually be a good thing and not just, something that has to be weeded out in the name of efficiency at all times. Maybe this is just me extrapolating a little bit, but that's sort of the broader lessons we can take. Just, again, the fact that I could spend a Saturday doing this as opposed to, having to either be productive or, doing the mandated sort of leisure activities we have. I don't know. I'm going nowhere with this stuff,
totally.
But,
the idea that to be a barbarian is the only way to be a so-called barbarian is the only way to be truly free. And that people who existed outside of the world of agricultural and then urban and industrial labor had a lot more leisure time. They also didn't, have literature and, culture as we know it, even if it's comprised mostly of, binging seasons of streaming television. But I know there's material there to be reckoned with that's meaningful. I think about how to think about how to build more meaningful lives. And so if there's one kind of simple takeaway of this book, it's sort of like, yeah, find that 10 minutes to go
Yeah.
go connect with wild nature within the fabric of that very urban day, and you might be amazed at how it changes how you experience life and think about the future.
Which kills me, because that's a perfect place to leave off, but I still have more questions. First of which, when did you encounter the Situationists? Do you remember?
Yeah, I mean, like in the 80s or 90s. Okay. It's like
sort of college or grad school time.
It was sort of, yeah, totally. I mean, I was reading Ballard and the cyberpunks and a lot of stuff at that sort of nexus of like technology and culture. And sort of, do you remember Adbusters magazine?
Yeah,
which was this, and so stuff like that, just like. Looking and in college, I went to college in the 80s, like peak, French continental philosophy everywhere. And so, and just a lot of the writers I was interested in were interested in, kind of applied psychogeography. And that kind of led back to the Situationists. And so I read Guy Debord and Society of the Spectacle and then eventually, in the 90s started, cluing into sort of Ian Sinclair and Will Self and folks like that. And I think, and it already just resonated with me as something I was already kind of doing on my own instinctively, of like figuring out ways to hack the city. And that next step from the book of like, okay, how do you like do a kind of eco-psychogeography that, steps off the pavement completely and into the green, sur les pavés, le forêt, or whatever. Was sort of where this book tries to go.
Gotcha. Gonna stick with nonfiction?
I don't know. I mean, it's.
I hate asking what your next project is.
A genre pivot. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm talking with a colleague about doing a more kind of how-to book about rewilding, and so that seems like that might happen. I really, really enjoy the mining of the what I was able to do in this book of like mining all this diverse material of like material from the observed world with sort of material accumulated through arcane reading. And I want to do more with that, I think. And I really want to, I want to get back to exercising my fiction muscles. And part of me is thinking it would be fun to write some short fiction and try to take it in a little bit more literary direction without giving up on the elements of the fantastic, which is kind of where I started as a fiction writer anyway.
And you know me, I'm sticking around for whatever you write. So you'll be on the show again. I'm pretty sure. But I should ask, the big final question I always bring up, and it usually comes up in the newsletter, but I'll hit you anyway. What are you reading? I
just read I was in Dallas in Terabang Books on Wednesday night for a reading, and I bought 3 BFI classics that I just immediately started binging. The one I first read that night, and basically read cover to cover by, I think the author was Sean Beard. It was about the Terminator. Like a book-length monograph about the Terminator, which got me thinking about the future it got me thinking about like a version of the Terminator in which the dystopian future is not a wasted landscape denuded of nature, but like one where the AI has like rewilded the future. I think that's there's something there.
Sean French, by the way, is the author. So, yeah. Sean French. French. Like
Sean French. Like there French you go. Toast. I got the first name right. Yeah. And then I've been reading The Great River by Boyce Upholt, who's a New Orleans-based writer, I think originally from the Northeast. There's a book about the Mississippi as one kind of giant edgeland. That's a really amazing book. I've been reading Crossings by Ben Goldfarb, a book about road ecology, which is like exceptionally cool. And I've been reading Wrong Way by Joanne McNeill, a really brilliant novel that came out from McD FSG earlier this year. And then enjoying Lost in Austin by Alex Hannaford, a British journalist who lived in Austin for several years and recently left. And yeah, those are kind of the top of my reading list. I just started reading Rachel Kushner's Creation Lake, which I think is kind of reckoning with some similar kind of deep time material in an interesting way. And I always find her work to be interesting and kind of tuned into the zeitgeist in cool ways.
Awesome. And you've got that Jeff Vandermeer sequel coming out, and Richard Powers too, which I assume, you partake in, but I haven't done Powers since the 90s. But
both books I'm excited about. I haven't started them yet. I didn't. Yeah, I should. I suppose I could ask Jeff for a sneak peek, but I think I'll wait. I've been really enjoying his insanely abundant energy he throws into promoting his work. It's fun. Yeah. He makes it fun. He does it in a really really cool way. And I've known him for a long time. I've gotten to know him better in the last couple of years. And yeah, I'm just super impressed with how he just does what is fun for him and
found an audience.
Gets other people excited about it. That's cool.
I saw him at ReaderCon, I guess 2 years ago. Was it last year or 2 years ago?
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, it was 23.
I was there 2 years ago, and he was there. I think he was the guest.
One of the guests of honor.
The guest of honor, maybe?
Yeah, and that was one of those.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of people to talk to. I don't need to go up and pitch him right now, but someday I hope we get to sit down and talk. So, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I got to hang. We went for a couple of hikes. It was really fun. Yeah. We went for one hike, and I had found this marsh in Quincy, and we went out, and it was just like so many mosquitoes. We had to,
July in Massachusetts, I find that hard to believe.
Like, we can do this, and then it was just like, yeah, no, we can't.
My wife and her friend have the sun hats with nets. They go out in for their hikes during summertime. So, we all have to.
Yeah, probably, I mean. He had a net, but even then, it was just like they were so aggressive. It was insane. It was like Central American grade, Massachusetts. Go figure. So.
Anyway, we're going to a different location for ReaderCon next year, so I hope to get you up there. And if we do, maybe we'll.
I would
go
love to get back. I seem to do ReaderCon every other year. So
that sounds good to me. Maybe we'll get to hike together. So
I would love that.
I'll bring good shoes. So, but Chris, thanks so much for coming back on, and thank you for this book. From talking with you last year, I had a conception of what it was going to be, and what you've written is really, well, to me, it's very special. You made a remarkable book, and I'm really, I'm glad to have you back on the show, but I'm also, and this will sound terrible, glad that we're friends. So, thank you for all this.
Well, thanks, Gil. No, I feel the same way. Thanks so much. And I'm really glad you connected with the book, and it's been delightful to hear similar things from other people. And so, yeah, I hope it connects with a lot of people, because it's sort of, in a way, it's also kind of well, it's not redemptive. It's also a book with a mission of kind of turning people on to what's around. And I hope that it achieves some of that. So thanks for helping me do that.
And that was Christopher Brown. Go get his new book, A Natural History of Empty Lots, Field Notes from Urban Edgelands, Back Alleys, and Other Wild Places. It's from Timber Press. It's a remarkable book and deserves a wide readership, and it'll make you see the world, especially the urban world, differently. It'll transform things for you. You should also get Chris's 3 previous novels, Tropic of Kansas, Rule of Capture, and Failed State. And you should definitely subscribe to his Field Notes newsletter, which is at fieldnotes.christopherbrown.com. You can check out his site for more about him and his work at christopherbrown.com, spelled just like you'd imagine, all one word. And follow him on Blue Sky at christopherbrown.bsky.social, Instagram at ebitdada, EBITDADA, and Mastodon at Christopher_Brown. I'll have links to all that in the show and episode notes for this one. You can support the Virtual Memories Show by telling other people about it. Let them know there's this podcast comes out every week, interesting conversations with fascinating people, except there won't be a show next week because I'll be in Italy, but we'll let that slide. You can also help out the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it, or who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or theater or art exhibition or park or weird little urban edgeland or whatever you think I should check out and turn listeners on to. And you can do that by sending me an email, sending a DM if we're connected on Instagram or Blue Sky. You can send me a postcard or a letter if you get my mailing address from the bottom of the newsletter that I send out twice a week, which you really should be subscribing to. There's a form on my website. And you can also use my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long. So you go longer than that, you'll just have to call back and leave another message. And let me know if it would be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with listeners, but I'd never run something like that without the speaker's permission, so let me know. Now, if you got money to spare, don't give it to me. I've got plenty. I work hard. I get paid well for what I do. I will ask you for money around the end of this year when I do a Kickstarter for the book that I'm making, but really give to other people, give to institutions in need. With people, you can go through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Crowdfunder, all those crowdfunding platforms, and you'll find people who need help with medical bills or rent or car payments or veterinary bills or getting an artistic project going or something else that's really important in their lives where just a couple dollars from you might make a real difference to them. Now, with institutions, I give to my local food bank and World Central Kitchen every month. I make targeted election contributions, but part of my job is being a lobbyist, so I sort of have to. But you can give to freedom funds, to Planned Parenthood, ecological funds. There are a lot of things you can do to try to help build a better world, so I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.